What if the only cure for a broken spirit wasn't medicine or therapy, but a bond that refuses to be broken? The halls of St. Catherine's Children's Hospital always smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and hope hanging by a thread. On the third floor, in a room near the end of the pediatric ward, sunlight struggled to reach the pale blue walls through smudged windows. Machines hummed softly, breaking the silence that had settled like a blanket over Emily Rhodes, age 6. For 34 days, Emily had not spoken. Not a word, not even a sound. Her eyes were open, but she seemed to see nothing. Her small body lay curled in the sheets, barely moving, as if she had been lost somewhere inside herself since the night her world shattered. Linda Rhodes, her grandmother, was always there in the hard-backed chair by the bed. Each day she brought a new storybook from home, sometimes fairy tales, sometimes stories about puppies and brave girls. Linda's voice would tremble as she read, forcing herself to believe that Emily could hear her, that maybe some word or memory would slip through the cracks of whatever had taken root in the child's mind. Sometimes, when no one else was around, Linda would simply talk to her about the weather, about Emily's favorite stuffed animal, about the days before the accident. She was careful never to mention the crash itself, the sirens, or the darkness that followed. Nurses rotated through their shifts, pausing at the doorway, their faces a mix of professional detachment and quiet worry. They whispered in the break room about how children sometimes went away inside themselves and never came back, about the limitations of medicine, about miracles and how rare they really were. A few tried to encourage Linda, assuring her that progress could be slow. Others avoided eye contact, not wanting to admit what they feared. Emily might never return. Sometimes at night, Linda would press her palm gently to Emily's cheek and whisper, "I'm right here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." The little girl never blinked. Machines measured her heart's steady rhythm, but Linda's heart ached with every silent minute. She wondered if she was losing her granddaughter the same way she'd lost her daughter, slowly, then all at once. Emily's silence wasn't just the absence of words. It was an absence of life. She did not react to pain or the softest brush of her grandmother's hand. She did not eat unless coaxed, did not flinch at the pinch of needles, did not cry. There were no tantrums, no laughter, no trace of the spirited girl who once chased butterflies in Linda's backyard. Only stillness and the relentless beep of hospital monitors. Every morning, Linda watched doctors come and go. Dr. Klein, the pediatrician, was gentle but firm in his assessments. "We're doing everything we can, Linda. Sometimes children need more time." She could tell he wanted to give her hope, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. Every so often, a psychologist would stop by, scribble notes, and leave with a worried frown. Days passed like this, a slow drip of hope and heartbreak. Linda noticed the world shrinking, her life now measured in shifts, visiting hours, and the patterns of sunlight crawling across hospital tiles. Friends called less often. Her own home felt foreign, haunted by silence, so she stayed at the hospital, refusing to leave Emily alone even for a night. One afternoon, the hospital's therapy coordinator, a brisk woman named Sheila, stopped by with a stack of pamphlets. She spoke about new initiatives, about bringing therapy dogs onto the ward to help children with trauma. Linda tried to listen, but her mind wandered, drifting back to the day Emily's parents' car was hit by a drunk driver, the impossible phone call, the feeling of being untethered from reality. She wondered what anyone could possibly do to break through to a child who had closed every door to the world. That night, a thunderstorm swept through the city. Lightning flashed against the hospital windows, briefly illuminating Emily's face. For a split second, Linda thought she saw a tear roll down the little girl's cheek. Or maybe it was just a trick of the light, a grandmother's wishful thinking. But the next morning, as sunlight crept across the room, Linda noticed Emily's eyelashes were damp. No one else saw. The doctors didn't mention it. But Linda took it as a sign, a small, silent plea that somewhere inside, her granddaughter was still there, fighting to find her way home. Yet the staff grew restless. Some wondered out loud if hope was just another word for denial. Others, especially Nurse Sandra, lingered longer at the door, gently squeezing Linda's shoulder before continuing on. "You're doing everything right, Mrs. Rhodes," she'd whisper, even when it was clear she was running out of things to say. That day, a new rumor began circulating among the staff about a special dog being brought in as part of the hospital's latest effort to help the toughest cases. Some rolled their eyes. Others, desperate for any sign of a miracle, allowed themselves a tiny sliver of hope. Linda heard the whispers and, for the first time in weeks, found herself wondering. If love and science had failed, was it possible something else could reach the little girl she loved so fiercely? Outside, the storm had passed. Inside, a new kind of anticipation began to grow. For Emily and Linda, the story was far from over. It was only just beginning. The following week at St. Catherine's felt strangely charged, as if the very air had shifted. The rumor mill was abuzz with talk of therapy dogs arriving, a last, hopeful measure for kids like Emily. In the nurses' station, skepticism mixed with anticipation. Some dismissed the idea as a publicity stunt. Others remembered stories of children who spoke their first words to a wagging tail, not a white coat. On Thursday morning, the staff gathered outside the pediatric wing for the big introduction. There were 4 dogs in all, 2 golden retrievers with glossy coats and soft eyes, a small beagle named Taffy who bounced with nervous energy, and, standing slightly apart from the others, a large German shepherd named Ace. His sable coat was peppered with gray along the muzzle, and his eyes, intelligent, intense, missed nothing. Ace was a rescue, found wandering the outskirts of the city months before, and the trainers said he had a calmness about him that was almost uncanny. The hospital's therapy coordinator, Sheila, explained the process. Each dog would be walked down the ward, allowed to meet the children who were awake and interested. Only if the dog showed a special affinity would there be more direct contact. "It's not just about the kids," Sheila said quietly to Nurse Sandra. "Sometimes the dogs know who needs them most." Linda sat by Emily's bedside as the commotion drifted down the hallway. She had heard about the dogs, but her hope was cautious. Emily hadn't responded to family, friends, or even the hospital clown who'd made balloon animals at her door last week. But something about the buzz of excitement outside made Linda stand and draw the curtains wider, letting sunlight spill across Emily's pillow. If there was even a sliver of a chance, she would take it. The first group of children was excited, and laughter echoed faintly down the corridor. One of the retrievers stopped to nuzzle a boy in a wheelchair. The beagle wriggled into a cluster of siblings, licking sticky hands and giggling faces. Each dog moved from room to room, patient, gentle, sometimes bored. Nurses watched carefully for any sign, a lifted head, a lingering look. Finally, it was Ace's turn. He moved differently from the others, steadier, deliberate. As he was led by Sheila and the trainer, his leash taut but loose in her hand, Ace sniffed the air, his ears pricked forward. He paused at several rooms, glancing inside, but then kept walking. When they reached Emily's room, something changed. Ace stopped abruptly, body tensing, nose high. He stared into the room, his gaze landing squarely on the unmoving girl in the bed. For a long moment, Ace wouldn't move. Sheila gently tugged his leash, but the big shepherd resisted, muscles coiled as if every fiber in him was being pulled toward Emily. The trainer, startled, knelt beside him, whispering, "Easy, boy." But Ace only pressed forward, his eyes never leaving Emily. From her chair, Linda watched, heart in her throat. There was something in the dog's stance, an unwavering attention, almost as if he recognized Emily, or sensed something no one else could. Nurse Sandra, drawn by the commotion, stepped inside and spoke softly. "Mrs. Rhodes, would you be willing to let Ace visit Emily just for a minute or two? He seems insistent." Desperation was a familiar companion for Linda by now. She nodded quickly. "If there's any chance, please." Sheila and the trainer led Ace into the room. The shepherd moved forward, stopping a few feet from the bed, sitting on his haunches, eyes fixed on Emily. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply waited, unmoving, patient as stone. For several long minutes, nothing happened. The staff outside exchanged glances. One whispered, "Maybe he's just tired." Another shook her head. "No, he's never acted like this before." Linda leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "Emily, sweetheart, there's someone here to see you." Her voice wavered, hope and fear tangled in every syllable. Ace cocked his head, ears swiveling, then inched closer, lowering his body to the floor, stretching out so his big paws rested only inches from Emily's dangling hand. He let out a deep, steady sigh, a sound that seemed to settle the whole room. Nurse Sandra scribbled a note on her chart. "Ace appears drawn to Emily, unusual intensity, patient, unresponsive." But her eyes betrayed a cautious optimism, a fragile spark that had been missing for weeks. The moment stretched on. A passing doctor stopped in the hall, peeking in with a look of curiosity. Ace didn't budge. He seemed to be waiting for something, his whole body radiating silent purpose. Linda, fighting tears, whispered, "You're not going to give up on her, are you?" Ace's tail thumped once, softly, as if in response. As the trainer gently called to him, Ace finally rose, reluctant to leave, his gaze lingering on Emily even as he was led out the door. The staff exchanged hushed words, theories, doubts, and a thin thread of hope. No other dog had reacted this way to Emily. Not even close. It was enough for Linda to ask if Ace could come back, just for a little while, just to see if there might be a crack in the armor that grief had built around her granddaughter's heart. That night, after the bustle died down, Linda sat by Emily's bed and whispered stories of brave girls and loyal dogs who never gave up, who waited and watched and loved until hope found a way through the darkness. For the first time, her voice felt less like pleading and more like a promise that, even when science had no more answers, something else might reach across the silence, and somewhere in the quiet, Linda found herself praying that tomorrow, Ace would return. By the following morning, the whole pediatric floor was buzzing about Ace. Word had spread quickly among staff and families about the German shepherd who refused to leave Emily Rhodes's doorway, who seemed to sense something in the silent girl that no one else could reach. Even the most skeptical nurses had begun to admit, at least to each other, that they were curious to see what would happen next. Linda didn't sleep much that night. Every time she dozed off, she'd wake with a start, afraid she'd missed some tiny shift in Emily's condition. But the girl's eyes remained distant, her expression unchanged, her hand still curled around the edge of the blanket. Linda spent the early hours staring out the window, watching the city below come to life with the morning sun, and praying that Ace would come back. Shortly after 9, Sheila and the trainer returned. Ace trotted alongside them, tail low but wagging gently, as if he understood he was on an important mission. Linda felt her breath catch. She tried not to hope too much, but there was something in the way Ace carried himself, a kind of quiet certainty, a focus that made her believe, if only for a moment, that something extraordinary was about to happen. Sheila spoke softly, careful not to break the fragile stillness of the room. "Mrs. Rhodes, are you sure you're comfortable with this?" Linda nodded. "Please, I want to try." The trainer crouched next to Ace just outside the door, whispering, "Easy, buddy. Just be yourself." Then, leash in hand, she led Ace inside. For a moment, nothing changed. Emily lay as she always did, still, pale, eyes unfocused. Ace stood just inside the room, head tilted, watching her with intense curiosity. He sniffed the air, as if searching for a scent only he could recognize. Then, slowly, he approached the bed. The nurses held their breath. Linda pressed her fist to her lips. Ace moved with remarkable gentleness, every step deliberate, until his nose was just inches from Emily's dangling hand. He paused, studying her face, then laid his chin on the edge of the mattress. Linda could see the rise and fall of his chest as he exhaled, steady and slow. For a minute that felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then Ace, ever so softly, nudged Emily's hand with his nose. Once, twice, insistent but careful, as if he understood that she was fragile, that this was a moment that could shatter or heal. The staff in the doorway froze. Linda stared, her heart hammering in her chest. At first it seemed like nothing had changed, but then Linda saw it, a tiny flicker in Emily's fingers. One finger twitched, then another. Ace stayed perfectly still. Linda almost didn't dare breathe. Emily's hand, which had not moved in 5 weeks, closed around a tuft of Ace's fur. Gasps filled the doorway. Nurse Sandra's chart fell to the floor. The trainer covered her mouth, eyes wide. Sheila blinked hard, as if trying to decide whether she was seeing a miracle or a trick of the light. Linda felt her knees go weak. She reached for the bed, steadying herself, afraid that if she made a sound, the fragile spell would be broken. She watched, tears streaming down her cheeks, as Emily's hand, her granddaughter's hand, clung to Ace like a lifeline. Ace didn't move. He seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, holding still as stone while Emily's grip tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. The only sound was the hum of the machines and the faint, whimpering gasp that escaped Linda's lips. The minutes crawled by. The trainer, still crouched by the door, whispered, Is she really moving?" Sheila, eyes glassy, just nodded, scribbling frantic notes. Linda knelt beside the bed, speaking softly so as not to startle Emily. "Sweetheart, can you feel Ace? He's here for you." Emily did not speak. She did not look at anyone. But for the first time since the accident, there was a tiny hint of color in her cheeks, a spark that hadn't been there the day before. When Ace shifted, just slightly, Emily's hand moved with him, her fingers clinging desperately, as if afraid he would vanish. Linda placed her own hand atop Emily's, adding her warmth to the moment. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's not going anywhere." The staff gathered outside could barely contain themselves. Some wiped away tears, others took photos with trembling hands, not quite sure whether to call this medicine, magic, or both. The pediatrician, Dr. Klein, arrived mid-scene, his usual calm shaken by what he was witnessing. "Remarkable," he murmured, "absolutely remarkable." Of course, there were skeptics. Later, in the staff lounge, one nurse muttered, "Could just be a reflex. Kids do strange things sometimes, even in comas." Dr. Avery, the child psychologist, agreed it was too early to call this a breakthrough. But, she admitted, sometimes the smallest change means hope. Linda didn't care what the chart said or what the experts thought. All she knew was that, for the first time in endless weeks, Emily had reached out for something, and that something had reached back. Ace remained by Emily's side for the rest of the session. When it was time to go, he hesitated, glancing back as if to say, "I'll be here if you need me." The trainer gently coaxed him away, promising they'd return soon. As the room emptied and the staff began to process what they'd seen, Linda sat by the bed, clutching Emily's hand in hers, refusing to let go. She whispered a prayer of gratitude to anyone or anything that might be listening. That night, for the first time since the accident, Linda allowed herself to imagine a different ending, a future where Emily might find her way back, step by step, word by word. And as Ace's paw prints faded down the hallway, the seeds of hope, quiet, stubborn, and persistent, began to take root in the heart of St. Catherine's. The mood on the pediatric floor shifted after that first contact. The moment Emily's fingers tightened around Ace's fur, an almost superstitious hush settled over St. Catherine's. In the nurses' lounge, the usual chatter quieted as staff replayed the scene again and again. Some called it luck. Others whispered about miracles. All anyone knew for sure was that something had changed. The very next morning, Linda was already awake, perched at Emily's bedside, waiting. She gently brushed the child's hair, her hands trembling with anticipation. Outside, the sun was rising, clear, golden, almost hopeful. When Sheila arrived with Ace, it was as if a current passed through the room. Ace entered without hesitation, ears perked and tail wagging softly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment all his life. This time Ace approached the bed and sat close, lowering his body until he was nearly nose to nose with Emily. Linda watched, hardly daring to blink. Ace waited patiently, his breath steady, filling the silence with a warmth that the machines and monitors could never provide. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emily's fingers twitched. Then, with a tiny effort, her hand slid over to rest atop Ace's paw. Each day afterward, Ace returned, and with every visit, Emily became a little more present. The changes were subtle at first. A slight turn of her head when Ace entered, a faint flicker of her eyelids, a soft exhale that could almost have been a sigh. One afternoon, while Linda was reading a story, Ace nuzzled Emily's hand with his wet nose, and Emily's lips curled ever so slightly at the corners. Linda nearly dropped her book. Word of Emily's small but steady progress spread quickly through the hospital. Staff who hadn't seen her in weeks stopped by, peeking into the room for a glimpse of hope. Even Dr. Klein, a man not easily impressed, stopped short when he found Emily propped up slightly on her pillows, watching Ace with something almost like curiosity. "We're seeing more engagement," he noted to the chart. "Monitor closely." Nurse Sandra became a regular visitor, sometimes sneaking Ace treats from her lunch. "Never seen anything like it," she confessed to Linda one day as Ace and Emily sat quietly together. "He's got the touch. Makes you wonder what dogs know that we don't." As the days passed, the connection between Ace and Emily deepened. Linda witnessed things that defied explanation, like the time Emily, after sitting silent and motionless for an hour, reached for the brush on her nightstand and began to gently run it through Ace's thick fur. Or the afternoon when Ace let out a single low whine and Emily shifted in her bed, her eyes flickering toward him as if answering a question only the two of them could understand. One day, 2 weeks after that first miraculous contact, Ace was about to leave when something remarkable happened. Linda was packing up her things, getting ready for another long night, when Ace stood at the door, looking back at Emily. The hospital hallway was quiet. The overhead lights buzzed softly. And then, out of the silence, a voice, barely more than a whisper, raw and hesitant, emerged from Emily's lips. "Please don't go." For a second, Linda wasn't sure she'd heard it. Neither was Nurse Sandra, who had just stepped into the room, chart in hand. But then they both froze, exchanging wide-eyed glances. Ace, too, turned, his ears swiveling toward Emily. Her lips trembled, her voice barely audible, but there was no mistaking it. Emily had spoken. Linda dropped to her knees beside the bed, tears pouring down her cheeks. She reached for Emily's hand, her own voice shaking. "Emily, honey, I'm here. I'm here, sweetheart." Sandra stood rooted in the doorway, her usual composure lost to the moment. "Dr. Klein," she called, her voice unsteady. Within minutes, the room was full. Nurses, doctors, even the janitor paused at the door, everyone desperate to witness the impossible. "Please don't go." Emily's voice was thin, a shadow of what it had been before the accident. But it was real. Her eyes, for the first time, met Linda's. Tentative, watery, but alive. Ace let out a deep, contented huff, then padded back to the side of the bed, resting his head on Emily's lap. Linda gathered her granddaughter in her arms, holding her close. It was the first real hug they'd shared since before the world turned upside down. The ward was electric with excitement. Staff exchanged hugs, some openly crying. Even the most skeptical among them had to admit. Something had happened in that room that defied all their expectations. Over the next hours, as news of Emily's words spread through St. Catherine's, Linda received visits from people she hadn't spoken to in weeks. Dr. Avery, the psychologist, stood by the bed, smiling softly. "It's just the beginning," she cautioned. "But it's a beginning we weren't sure we'd ever see." Linda knew better than to expect too much, too quickly. She spent the evening sitting beside Emily, telling her stories, humming old lullabies, and thanking Ace again and again for being the bridge that had brought her granddaughter back from the edge. As the sun dipped behind the hospital, painting the sky in gold and lavender, Emily drifted off to sleep with her hand resting on Ace's back. Linda closed her eyes, exhausted but at peace, and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Ace. Don't ever give up on her. We won't either." Outside in the hallway, the hospital staff gathered, voices hushed but brimming with hope. In that moment, everyone at St. Catherine's believed in miracles again, even if just for a little while. Emily's first words, faint, uncertain, yet so deeply longed for, set off a quiet revolution at St. Catherine's. The next morning, sunlight spilled into her room as if it had been waiting for this moment. Linda, running on little sleep but renewed hope, couldn't keep the smile off her face. She fussed over Emily's hair, fluffed her pillows, and even brought in a faded drawing from home, a lopsided dog with a heart-shaped nose that Emily had once proudly taped to her bedroom door. For the first time since the accident, the room felt less like a place of waiting and more like a place of living. When Ace entered, Emily's eyes followed him. She didn't speak right away, but her gaze tracked the shepherd as he padded to her bedside, tail sweeping in slow arcs. This time, instead of merely holding his fur, Emily raised her hand and set it gently on his head, tracing the soft line between his ears. The change was small, almost imperceptible, but to Linda, it felt like sunrise after a long, bitter night. Within days, the transformation was undeniable. Each morning, Ace would arrive, sometimes led by Sheila, sometimes by one of the young volunteers. No matter who brought him, His devotion to Emily was unwavering. The girl began sitting up more, propped against pillows, her eyes alert and watching Ace's every move. She spoke a little, mostly to Ace at first. Short words, a whispered, "good boy," or a simple, "stay." The staff recorded every detail, unable to contain their fascination. Linda, cautious yet overjoyed, found herself daring to hope. She brought in small tasks for Emily, holding a brush, feeding Ace bits of apple or cheese from a cup, even helping to tie his blue collar. Each day, Emily's motions grew more purposeful, her smiles more frequent. The little girl who had once seemed lost was slowly resurfacing. One afternoon, as Ace lay sprawled beside the bed, Emily picked up a crayon from her tray and, with careful movements, drew a picture, a girl and a dog walking under a bright sun. Linda blinked back tears. "That's beautiful, honey. Is that you and Ace?" Emily nodded, pressing the crayon firmly as if anchoring herself to the world. Emily's laughter was still rare, but when it came, it was infectious. During therapy, when Ace rolled onto his back and pretended to snore, Emily's soft giggle echoed down the hallway, pulling in a crowd of nurses who smiled and blinked away tears of their own. "She's coming back," Sandra whispered to Dr. Klein as they watched from the door. "I think she really is." Not everyone was convinced. In meetings, Dr. Avery and a few other staff members reminded everyone of the unpredictable nature of trauma recovery. "It's remarkable progress," Dr. Avery admitted. "But let's not declare victory yet. Sometimes kids regress, especially when the cause of their trauma is unresolved." Still, even she couldn't help but smile when Ace trotted into her office, tail wagging, as if to say, "Just watch." There were skeptics among the hospital staff, some of whom muttered about coincidence or placebo. "It could just be a phase," an orderly remarked as he changed Emily's sheets. "Sometimes kids have these ups before they go back down." But every day that Emily smiled, spoke, or reached for Ace, their doubts grew smaller, the whispers of hope louder. One evening, as Linda was gathering Emily's drawings and readying for bed, she found herself staring at Ace, at the familiar slope of his back, the white patch on his chest, the way he pressed close to Emily with gentle protectiveness. Something tugged at her memory. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old, weathered photograph. The last picture of Buddy, Emily's beloved dog lost in a storm a year before. The resemblance was uncanny. Same soulful eyes, same quiet confidence, even the same way he leaned into the people he loved. Nurse Sandra, catching sight of the photo, knelt beside Linda. "Is that him?" she whispered, incredulous. Linda nodded, showing her the image. "Buddy was Emily's best friend. We never found him after that terrible night." Sandra studied the photo, then looked at Ace, who was now asleep with his head on Emily's lap. "I swear, Linda, if I believed in ghosts." She let the sentence trail off, but the wonder remained. The next day, Linda showed the picture to Emily, unsure what to expect. Emily stared at it for a long moment. Her lips parted. "Is he Buddy? Did he find me again?" Her voice was soft, uncertain, but full of longing. Linda pulled her close. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe he did." Word spread quickly about the uncanny likeness, and some staff privately debated the odds. Was it possible? Dogs went missing, dogs were found. But this felt like fate, or something close to it. Still, no one could prove anything. Linda, recognizing the need for hope more than answers, let Emily believe what she needed to believe. As the days turned to weeks, Emily's progress inspired the entire ward. Staff started requesting Ace for other children, noticing how his presence seemed to lighten even the most somber days. "He's our little miracle worker," the volunteers joked, but there was reverence in their voices now. Every evening, as the sun set and the world outside faded to dusk, Emily would curl up with Ace, her hand resting on his warm fur, her breathing deep and even. Linda would watch from her chair, overwhelmed by gratitude and awe. For so long she'd been afraid to hope. Now hope had returned, not as a sudden miracle, but as a gentle, steady light that refused to go out. And somewhere deep inside, Linda knew. The girl she loved was coming back, step by step, with a shepherd at her side and a story only they would ever truly understand. With every passing day, the bond between Emily and Ace grew deeper, almost uncanny. Their silent conversations, the way they moved together, left the staff at St. Catherine's whispering in awe and speculation. The whole pediatric floor now buzzed with stories. Nurses comparing notes, therapists exchanging theories, even parents of other patients sharing hopeful glances when Ace walked by. He'd become more than a therapy dog. He was a living symbol of hope, but for Linda, the joy was tangled with confusion and old wounds. The resemblance between Ace and Buddy was now impossible to ignore. She found herself studying Ace's markings as he slept on the floor. White blaze on the chest, a faint scar above his left eye, the way he curled his tail just so. Sometimes, late at night, Linda would sit in the dim light of Emily's room, the photograph of Buddy on her lap, and wonder if miracles could take the shape of a lost dog finding his way home. One quiet afternoon, as a light rain tapped against the window, Linda sat with Nurse Sandra near the door. Emily was drawing quietly on her tray table, Ace's head in her lap. Linda glanced down at the faded photograph, and then at Ace. "It's almost eerie," she murmured. "I know it sounds ridiculous, but he looks so much like Buddy, right down to that little notch on his ear." Sandra nodded, her skepticism softening. "I don't think it's crazy. I've seen kids believe in stranger things, and sometimes it's what they believe that pulls them through." Linda hesitated, then handed the photo to Sandra. The nurse squinted, tracing the outline of the old dog. "That's not just a resemblance," she whispered. Well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?" Later that day, as Emily rested, Linda gently showed her the photo. Emily held it with both hands, studying it with a furrowed brow. After a long pause, she looked up, her voice barely audible. "Is he Buddy? Did he find me again?" Her eyes shimmered with hope and fear, as if she was bracing herself for disappointment. Linda hugged her, smoothing her hair. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe he did." That night, Linda lay awake in the uncomfortable chair beside Emily's bed, listening to the rain and the steady breathing of both child and dog. Her mind wandered through old memories, Buddy as a puppy, Emily's giggles as he chased her in the yard, the night he disappeared during a terrible storm, the image of a frantic search, flashlights in the dark, and Linda's desperate calls echoed in her mind. They had never found Buddy, not a trace. The idea that he might have survived, wandered the city, and somehow returned in the guise of a therapy dog seemed impossible. And yet here Ace was, loving Emily with the same fierce loyalty, protecting her as Buddy once had. Over the next few days, the hospital staff started to notice strange coincidences. Ace responded to Emily's commands before she spoke them aloud. He would fetch her favorite toy, nudge her awake from restless sleep, even sit by the door on nights when Emily cried quietly for her parents. The other therapy dogs were wonderful, but Ace seemed attuned to something deeper, an unspoken need, a sorrow that only he could reach. The speculation among the nurses grew. Some chalked it up to the mysterious ways animals sense human emotion. Others began to whisper about fate, about how sometimes the universe sends exactly what's needed at exactly the right time. But a few, including Dr. Avery, clung to logic. In a staff meeting, she argued, "There's no evidence to support the idea that this is Emily's lost dog. It's an emotional projection, a child's way of coping with loss. Let's not encourage magical thinking." Dr. Klein, ever the pragmatist, simply shrugged. "Maybe. But what's undeniable is that Ace is helping her heal, whatever the reason. I say we let her believe what she needs to believe." Linda found herself agreeing. She watched as Emily grew stronger, more confident each day. The little girl began to speak more often, not just to Ace, but to Linda, the nurses, even her doctors. She asked for her favorite books, requested music at bedtime, and one day asked if she could go outside with Ace, just for a few minutes of fresh air. The hospital psychologist, Dr. Avery, scheduled a session with Linda to discuss Emily's progress. In the quiet office, Avery reviewed her notes. "We see children form strong attachments to animals, especially after trauma. It's not unusual for a child to see a lost pet in a new dog. The important thing is that Emily is engaging with the world again. That's what matters." Linda nodded, but she could not shake the sense that this was more than coincidence. She described the uncanny way Ace responded to old commands, the way he would rest his head in Emily's lap just as Buddy once had. "Call it what you want, Doctor," Linda said softly. "All I know is Emily's coming back to me, and Ace, Buddy, whatever you call him, he's the reason." That night, after visiting hours had ended, Linda found herself sitting beside Ace as he lay by Emily's bed. She stroked his fur, whispering, "If you really are Buddy, thank you. Thank you for finding her, for not giving up." Ace lifted his head, gazing at her with those deep brown eyes that seemed to hold the weight of secrets. Emily, half asleep, murmured, "Don't go, Ace. Promise you'll stay." Ace licked her hand, settling in even closer, as if swearing an oath. In the weeks that followed, Linda let go of the need for certainty. She decided that the truth wasn't as important as the love that filled the room. Love that bridged the gap between loss and healing, between past and present. Whether Ace was Buddy returned, or simply a miracle in his own right, Emily believed. And sometimes belief was enough. Outside, the spring rain finally let up. Sunlight glimmered through the hospital windows, casting warm patterns on the floor where Emily and Ace rested together, a girl and her dog, held together by hope and by a bond that refused to be broken. As word spread of Emily's remarkable progress, St. Catherine's Children's Hospital felt charged with anticipation and cautious optimism. The story of the silent girl who began to speak and laugh again, all because of a therapy dog, became a touchstone throughout the pediatric wing. In the cafeteria, doctors whispered in clusters. In the break room, nurses compared notes. Everyone wanted to believe in miracles, but medicine had taught them to be wary of hope that burned too bright, too soon. Emily's days soon fell into a gentle, healing rhythm. She woke to find Ace curled at her feet, tail thumping softly against the sheets. Mornings began with Linda reading favorite books aloud, her voice now punctuated with laughter as Emily chimed in, correcting a word or giggling at a funny line. At lunchtime, Ace would sit beside the bed, head resting patiently on Emily's knee, waiting for his share of apple slices or the occasional scrap of cheese. Linda and the nurses took careful notes of each small victory. Emily's vocabulary expanded. She greeted Nurse Sandra with a shy, "Hi," and surprised Dr. Klein with a quiet, "Thank you," during a checkup. Her movements, once hesitant and slow, grew more confident as she brushed Ace's coat or drew pictures for her grandmother. Even her appetite improved. a point of celebration for staff who'd watched her wither for weeks. But as Emily's progress became more visible, a note of uncertainty crept into conversations behind closed doors. The hospital's child psychologist, Dr. Avery, called a special meeting with the pediatric team. She arrived carrying a thick folder of case notes and medical literature, her face set in a line of professional concern. "We need to talk about Emily's recovery," Dr. Avery began, her voice measured but kind. "While we're all grateful for the progress, I want to remind everyone that breakthroughs in trauma cases can be fleeting. Sometimes children make incredible gains, only to regress weeks or months later. The attachment to Ace is clearly helping, but we have to be prepared for setbacks." Dr. Klein, his brow furrowed, nodded. "Of course. But isn't it our job to support what works, as long as it's safe?" He looked around the table, finding cautious agreement in the eyes of his colleagues. Dr. Avery continued, "I've seen these miracle cases before. Sometimes when a child's hope is tied to a single person or animal, they can become vulnerable if anything changes. We need a plan in case Ace can't be with her every day. We also need to be realistic with Linda and with ourselves." The words landed heavily. The staff all cared deeply for Emily and wanted her progress to last. Still, the idea that her fragile recovery could vanish with the loss of one dog made everyone uneasy. Meanwhile, Linda was beginning to notice a different kind of fear in herself. A fear not of losing Emily, but of the delicate thread holding her together. She spent her nights in the pull-out chair beside Emily's bed, watching her granddaughter sleep soundly for the first time since the accident. Emily clutched Ace's collar, fingers tangled in his fur, breathing deep and even. Each night, as the hospital's fluorescent lights dimmed and the world grew quiet, Linda would listen for the slightest hitch in Emily's breathing, terrified that the silence might return. One night, after midnight, Linda found herself unable to sleep. She stepped out into the hallway, rubbing her tired eyes, and nearly collided with Nurse Sandra, who was refilling a water jug. Sandra gave her a sympathetic smile. "You doing okay, Mrs. Rhodes?" Linda hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm scared, Sandra. I'm scared this could all slip away, just like before." Sandra leaned against the wall, her tone soft and reassuring. "You're not alone. We all want this for her. And if I'm honest, I think Ace is more than just a therapy dog. He's something else. I've never seen a connection like this." She paused, searching for words. "But if you ever need anything, if it gets hard again, you ask, okay?" Linda smiled, blinking back tears. "Thank you, I will." Later that night, as Linda sat back in the darkened room, she whispered to Ace, "Promise me you'll stay with her. Promise you'll help her if she falls back." Ace looked up, eyes warm and steady, and placed his head in Linda's lap. She stroked his fur, heart aching with gratitude and fear. The next morning brought another round of checkups and cautious optimism. Dr. Avery stopped by with a puzzle and a gentle smile, asking Emily about her favorite animal. Emily, cheeks pink, held up a picture of a dog that looked suspiciously like Ace, complete with a blue collar and a wide, happy grin. "I want him to stay with me forever," Emily whispered, glancing at Linda. Dr. Avery nodded. "He's a good friend, isn't he?" She made careful notes, her mind working through worst-case scenarios, but her heart undeniably warmed by the sight before her. As days turned into weeks, Emily's sleep remained peaceful. No more nightmares, no more silent tears in the dark. She clung to Ace's collar each night as if it were a lifeline, and in many ways, it was. The hospital staff grew accustomed to the sight of Emily and Ace together, inseparable, radiating a quiet kind of joy that softened even the hardest days. But uncertainty lingered, a shadow just beyond the reach of hope. Would Emily's recovery last? Would she be able to face her grief if something happened to Ace? These questions haunted Linda, Dr. Avery, and even Dr. Klein. Late one evening, as the ward fell quiet, Linda found herself whispering into the darkness. Does it matter how? She's coming back. Isn't that enough? She thought of all the doctors, the counselors, the therapy sessions that had failed to reach Emily. And now, here she was, healing, smiling, learning to trust the world again. Sometimes, Linda decided, you didn't need to understand the miracle. You just needed to believe in it. As the sun rose over St. Catherine's, painting the city in gold, hope and hesitation walked side by side. Emily's journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, her future felt possible and worth fighting for. Spring's arrival at St. Catherine's brought with it a sense of renewal. Fresh flowers bloomed in window boxes, and sunlight lingered longer in the halls, as if drawn by the gentle transformation taking place within room 312. Where once there had been only silence and sorrow, now laughter and conversation flowed freely. Emily was changing, and everyone noticed. Emily's recovery accelerated with every passing week. With Ace at her side, she ventured further from her bed, first to the hallway, then to the hospital's small indoor playroom. At first, she clung tightly to his collar, her steps hesitant and slow. But Ace was patient. He moved at her pace, matching her every stride, his quiet presence offering courage when her nerves faltered. Before long, Emily was tossing a ball across the playroom, giggling as Ace fetched it and dropped it at her feet, tail wagging, tongue lolling. Linda watched each new milestone with awe. It was as if Ace had not only healed Emily's mind, but restored her childhood itself. The staff called it the Ace effect. Even children who had never spoken to Emily before began to join her and Ace during playtime, drawn by the joy in her eyes and the gentle reassurance of the big shepherd at her side. As Emily regained her speech and playfulness, schoolwork soon followed. Hospital volunteers brought simple lessons to her bedside: reading, drawing, counting games. At first, Emily would only participate if Ace sat beside her, his paw resting on the edge of her worksheet. She'd whisper answers into his ear, glancing up for approval, her confidence growing with every smile and gentle nudge from her furry friend. Linda's gratitude was boundless, but she was not alone. The hospital staff, once skeptical, now looked to Ace as something more than just a therapy dog. He was a fixture on the pediatric floor, making daily rounds with the volunteers, stopping to visit children who were scared or sad. With each visit, the mood in the ward seemed to lighten. Parents would catch sight of Ace and Emily walking hand in paw and breathe a little easier, reminded that even the darkest moments could yield to hope. One afternoon, a group of nurses gathered by the window as Ace led Emily around the garden. She stopped to pick dandelions, giggling when Ace tried to sniff them and sneezed, sending fluffy seeds into the breeze. Nurse Sandra turned to Dr. Klein, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "It's like he knows what each kid needs," she said. "I used to think we had all the answers. Now I'm not so sure." Dr. Klein nodded, his skepticism fading. "Maybe answers aren't always what we need," he replied quietly. "Sometimes it's just presence." Even the other children benefited from the Ace effect. A shy boy recovering from leukemia asked to read to Ace. A girl with a broken leg found the courage to try walking again, holding tight to the dog's harness as Emily cheered her on. The sense of community grew, woven together by the shepherd's quiet magic. Meanwhile, Linda found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them all here. She watched Emily draw a picture of herself and Ace, standing side by side in a field of wildflowers, their smiles wide and bright, and felt tears prick her eyes. For so long, she had lived in fear of loss. Now she found herself living in gratitude, every moment with Emily and Ace a gift she had almost given up hoping for. One evening, as the sun dipped low and golden light poured through the windows, Linda and Emily sat together by the window. Ace lay at their feet, eyes half closed, content. Linda squeezed Emily's hand. "You're getting stronger every day, sweetheart." Emily nodded. "It's because of Ace. He makes me feel brave." Linda brushed a stray curl from Emily's face. "You were always brave, Em. Ace just helped you remember." There were still moments of uncertainty, of course. Sometimes Emily would wake from a nightmare, calling for Ace, tears streaking her cheeks. On those nights, Ace would climb onto the bed, lying close until her breathing slowed and sleep returned. Linda watched these scenes, grateful beyond words for the dog who had become her granddaughter's guardian and friend. Hospital staff, once doubtful, grew protective of Ace. They coordinated his schedule, making sure he had breaks and plenty of treats. Sheila, the therapy coordinator, started tracking the impact Ace had not just on Emily, but on the entire ward. "I think we're witnessing something rare," she confided to Linda one day. "This isn't just about one child or one dog. It's about what can happen when you refuse to give up hope." Emily's world expanded with every passing day. She reconnected with her school friends over video calls, telling them stories about Ace's silly antics and his superpowers. Linda smiled, listening to the tales, a mixture of fact and fantasy, but all true in the ways that mattered most. When the hospital hosted a small celebration to honor Emily's progress, children, staff, and families gathered in the playroom. There was cake, music, and a special treat for Ace, a big bone wrapped in a blue ribbon. Linda stood at the front, tears shining in her eyes, as she thanked everyone for their support. "We wouldn't be here without you, and we certainly wouldn't be here without Ace." As the celebration wound down, Linda glanced around the room at the faces of the nurses, doctors, and families whose lives had been touched by one extraordinary dog. She realized that skepticism had been replaced by gratitude, a quiet recognition that some bonds defy explanation, that some healing happens not in the laboratory, but in the spaces between heartbeats, in the gentle brush of a paw, in the laughter of a child rediscovering joy. Emily knelt beside Ace, hugging his neck, her eyes shining. "You're my best friend," she whispered. "Thank you for finding me." And in that moment, with hope restored and the community united, everyone at St. Catherine's understood. The truest medicine is sometimes simply love that refuses to let go. A few weeks after Emily's remarkable turnaround, St. Catherine's became the focus of a different kind of attention. The whispers about the Ace miracle made their way beyond the hospital walls, catching the curiosity of the local community and then the local press. Soon, a reporter named Maya Brooks arrived with her notebook and a camera crew, eager to capture a story that was already being called a lesson for all of us. Maya's arrival created a stir among the hospital staff. Some were wary, not wanting to raise false hopes or oversell what they couldn't explain. Others welcomed the chance to celebrate something good for a change. "We could use some positive news," Nurse Sandra said, straightening her scrubs in the hallway. "Let them see what hope looks like." On her first afternoon, Maya joined Linda and Emily in the hospital garden, where sunlight danced across the benches and flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds. Ace sprawled at Emily's feet, eyes closed, soaking up the warmth as Emily braided dandelions into a chain. Maya was struck first by the ordinariness of the moment. A girl, her grandmother, and a dog. It could have been any family, anywhere. But here, every detail carried weight. Maya began her interviews gently, her questions respectful. "Linda, can you tell me what it was like before Ace? What changed?" Linda hesitated, brushing a tear from her cheek. "It was like living in a tunnel. Emily was so far away. We tried everything, medicine, therapy, prayers. Nothing reached her. Until Ace. He came in and just sat. He waited. He didn't ask anything of her. And somehow that was enough. He did what doctors and family and hope itself couldn't do." Emily glanced up shyly, petting Ace. "He found me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "When I was lost, he stayed." Nurse Sandra spoke next, recalling her early doubts. "I thought it was a coincidence, honestly. I've worked here 20 years, and I've seen a lot of hopeful stories fall apart. But every day, Ace drew Emily out of her shell. It was like he had a map to wherever she was hiding." She laughed, shaking her head. He'd nudge her, stand guard when she was scared. He even seemed to know when the nightmares were coming. It changed all of us. Dr. Klein, the pediatrician, explained the science. There's research on therapy animals and recovery, endorphins, oxytocin, all that. But sometimes you see something that feels bigger than a study. Ace and Emily. It was like he reached across whatever was broken inside her and offered her a way back. It was humbling. Maya asked tough questions too. She met with Dr. Avery, the child psychologist, who was honest about her initial skepticism. "I worried this breakthrough might not last. In trauma, we often see 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But Emily's progress held, and her relationship with Ace was the anchor. There's a lesson in humility here for all of us, knowing when to let go of our need for answers and let connection do its work." Maya took it all in, her notes filling with words like trust, faith, and healing. She watched as Ace made his rounds through the garden, stopping to comfort another child with a gentle nuzzle, then returning to Emily, who beamed every time he was near. The story grew in the telling. After her interviews, Maya sat with Linda beneath a blooming cherry tree. "Do you ever wonder how it worked? Why Ace?" she asked. Linda smiled softly, watching Emily and Ace chase a butterfly. "I used to. I spent a long time looking for the why. Now I think it doesn't matter. Sometimes, when everything else fails, love finds a way. Maybe some things aren't meant to be explained. Maybe they're just meant to be believed." Maya's article appeared in the Sunday paper a week later. The headline read, "When Science Meets Mystery, the Miracle of St. Catherine's." The story touched hearts throughout the city and beyond, sparking conversations in coffee shops, church groups, and school hallways. Letters poured in from families who had lost hope, from medical professionals inspired to try something new, and from volunteers wanting to join the hospital's therapy dog program. The hospital responded in kind, hosting a seminar on animal-assisted therapy. Dr. Klein presented research and real stories. Linda spoke with quiet passion about her journey. Even Dr. Avery, the eternal skeptic, found herself standing before a crowded room, encouraging colleagues to remain open to the surprising ways healing happens. Meanwhile, more families requested therapy dog visits for their children. Emily and Ace became local celebrities. Strangers would smile at them in the halls. Parents would quietly thank Linda, and other young patients seemed more eager to try, to talk, to trust. The Ace effect was no longer just Emily's miracle. It was a movement. Emily, for her part, took it all in stride. In an interview for a follow-up article, Maya knelt beside her and asked, What do you think happened, Emily? Emily hugged Ace's neck, her voice quiet and sure. Ace found me when I was lost. He didn't give up until I found my way back. Maybe some things aren't meant to be explained, just believed. Looking back, the staff realized that the greatest lessons weren't written in medical charts or psychology textbooks. They saw that recovery isn't always logical or linear. Sometimes it means believing in what you can't explain. Sometimes, the greatest medicine is presence and unconditional love, things that reach where words and treatments cannot. And so, the story of Emily and Ace became a touchstone, not only for the hospital, but for a wider world hungry for hope. Healing, everyone realized, can arrive in the most unexpected ways, and sometimes it wears a wagging tail and a blue collar. 6 months had passed since the day Emily Rhodes first spoke again. If you walked into St. Catherine's Children's Hospital now, you might not even recognize the girl who once lay silent and unresponsive, lost to grief. The hospital, too, was changed, not just by one miraculous recovery, but by the way hope had taken root in the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Emily was no longer a patient. After a joyful farewell party, complete with balloons, music, and a big blue cake shaped like a dog bone, she left the hospital hand in hand with her grandmother Linda, and with Ace trotting beside them, his blue collar gleaming. The adoption paperwork had gone through. Linda was now officially Emily's guardian, and Ace, too, had become family in every way that mattered. At home, life unfolded with a new sense of wonder and gratitude. The house that once echoed with silence now rang with Emily's laughter and the tap of Ace's paws on the hardwood floors. There were framed pictures of Ace and Emily on every shelf, her holding up her schoolwork, Ace at her feet during homework, the two of them curled together in the backyard sunlight. Emily's bedroom was filled with crayon drawings, fields of wildflowers, blue skies, and always the figure of a shepherd dog beside a smiling girl. Every morning, Emily woke up early, eager to start the day. She had favorite routines: brushing Ace, helping Linda pack lunches, running down the block with Ace at her side. Together they explored the neighborhood parks, chased after butterflies, and stopped to greet neighbors who knew their story and waved from their porches. The blue collar that Ace wore had become more than just a reminder of the past. It was a badge of courage and hope, a symbol of everything they had survived together. Emily never took it off, even when they splashed through summer rain puddles or curled up for bedtime stories on the living room couch. At St. Catherine's, the changes sparked by Emily's recovery continued to ripple outward. The hospital's therapy dog program, once a small experiment, had grown into Ace's Angels, a dedicated team of therapy dogs and volunteers inspired by the story of a girl and her dog. Photos of Ace hung in the main hallway, and new patients were greeted by friendly canine faces almost every day. Families arriving at the hospital, nervous and afraid, found comfort in the knowledge that hope often came in unexpected forms. The staff, doctors, nurses, counselors, shared Emily's story with new families, reminding them that healing doesn't always follow a chart or a timeline. Sometimes you just have to let love do its work, Nurse Sandra would say, her eyes shining with the memory of Emily's first words. Dr. Klein, once the ultimate pragmatist, became one of the program's most passionate advocates. Even Dr. Avery, the psychologist, spoke at conferences about the ACE effect, urging colleagues to remain open to mystery and to the unexplainable bonds that sometimes change lives. At the hospital's annual gala, Linda was asked to give a speech. The ballroom was filled with families, supporters, and staff whose lives had been touched by the story. Ace, proudly wearing his blue collar and a special medal, sat at Emily's feet. Linda took the stage, her voice trembling with emotion, as she looked out at the audience. "We learned that healing takes many forms," she began. "Sometimes the greatest medicine is a friend who refuses to leave your side, even when you can't ask for help. We don't always get to choose the trials we face, but we can choose to believe in love, in hope, and in each other." She told the story of the long nights in the hospital, the first time Emily's hand closed around Ace's fur, the miracle of hearing her granddaughter's voice again. She spoke of fear and faith, of the moments when she wanted to give up, and the moments when she decided to keep hoping. Ace taught us that sometimes the bridge back to life isn't made of medicine or words, but of presence. He taught us that hope can wear fur and have a tail, and that miracles, small or large, can happen if you let yourself believe. When Linda finished, the crowd erupted in applause. Emily, shy but radiant, took the microphone. "When I was the most lost, Ace found me," she said, her voice strong. "He didn't talk, but he listened and waited. He made me brave enough to come back." After the speeches, Dr. Klein addressed the audience. "We saw what can happen when community, compassion, and open minds come together. Emily's story reminds us, never underestimate the healing power of connection, human or canine. In our world, where answers are often hard to find, sometimes the best thing we can do is trust in the bonds we form and the love we offer every day." From that night on, Ace's Angels became a beacon for families in need. More volunteers joined, more therapy dogs were trained, and children found comfort in wagging tails and gentle eyes. The program inspired similar efforts at hospitals across the city, then across the state. As for Emily and Ace, life continued, simple, beautiful, and full of possibility. They went to school together, Ace as the unofficial classroom mascot, hiked in the woods, celebrated birthdays, and sometimes just sat quietly in the grass, watching clouds drift by. Emily's laughter, once lost to trauma, became a soundtrack for her new beginning. Linda, watching them play in the sunlight, would sometimes feel tears in her eyes, not of grief, but of gratitude and awe. She would remember those dark hospital nights, the uncertainty and fear, and marvel at how far they'd come. "Thank you," she would whisper, to Ace, to the doctors, to fate itself. And so, the story closed not with an ending, but with a beginning. Emily and Ace, side by side, running through a sunlit park, the past finally behind them, the future bright and open. The lesson echoed for everyone who heard their tale. Healing is more than a medical process. It's an emotional, social, and even spiritual journey. Love, loyalty, and unwavering presence can guide us through the darkest times, often when nothing else can. Sometimes hope wears fur, and sometimes it never really leaves us at all.